I want to start, and I want you to take us back to the day you woke up and you were like, I don't think I'm terribly happy right now, and that doesn't make a ton of sense given the context within which I am living my life, which is that I have one of the most successful books of the last 10 years, and I'm not quite sure what comes next, though.
So I think actually Tim mentioned it in his talk that when you hit the top of the mountain, you don't feel good, you just feel even more anxious because you realize that there's nowhere to go but down the other side. So when the book started taking off, obviously the first few months there was an elation, there was this huge relief, like, oh my God, I nailed it. Like everything, I thought this was going to take 10, 20 years, and I nailed this shit. Like right out of the gate, just hit it. And then a few months go by, and then a few months go by, and I'm like, wait a second, what the hell do I do with myself? Like why? I could go out and promote my book for a month and sell a bunch of copies, or I could sit at home and play Zelda all day and sell the same amount of copies. And that sounds amazing on paper, but it actually sets in this intense like identity crisis of like, well, if anything I write next is gonna be like on that downhill side of that mountain, well then crap, I don't want to write anything. But wait a second, I'm 32, so I'm supposed to keep writing things. And so this kind of paralyzing anxiety just set in. And it took the better part of a year to kind of get through it and find my inspiration again and figure out what the way forward was going to be.
Yeah, and one of my goals in conversations like this is like you've already done a bunch of podcasts and people can go listen to those if they want to hear everything about the book. But one of the things that I thought was interesting in all of this was like publishers had all their own ideas for what you should do next.
Oh yeah.
They had all kinds of stuff they wanted you to do. They wanted you to take like the chicken soup for the teenage soul kind of route.
Yes, they wanted me to do subtle art for teens, subtle art for parents, subtle art for, your next door neighbor. Like and I think my exact email to my editor was, I'm not gonna write chicken soup for the soul for fuckfaces. That was like verbatim what I sent them. And they were like, all right, we'll drop it.
Yeah. So, that doesn't help make any progress on your end of things. So what was your process like? So you had this year-long kind of time period where you went from, okay, what now, to really getting back into it, and you've got a bunch of exciting stuff going on now. So what was your process like for getting through that?
So you get kind of put in this weird spot of like, oh my God, I'm never going to top this. But then, so that on the one hand is kind of demotivating you. It encourages you to sit around in your underwear all day. And then on the flip side of that, you have all these publishers and people start coming towards you and offering you massive amounts of money to do X, Y, and Z. And because you're so anxious about what's happening, your first thought is like, oh crap, I better cash in while I can. Like that's the first temptation, is like to agree to do a bunch of projects that normally you wouldn't really do, but you're like, oh, this might be my 15 minutes, like let's get paid.
Right.
But then maybe you start signing on for that, and you're like, wait a second, I don't actually want to do this, and this feels awful. And so there just kind of becomes this like a crisis around like what do you actually want? And it's one of the things I talk about in the new book is that we're all very used to hearing about how pain complicates our values in our lives. What I didn't expect is how success can also complicate your values and what you want out of your life. So eventually I just kind of went back to first principles, which is, what's always motivated me as a writer. Anybody here who's read my blog, everything I write, it always comes from a starting point of I'm solving my own shit first.
Yeah.
Like I don't like to be the guru on stage who's, like pay me a bunch of money and follow these 5 steps, blah, blah, blah. Like everything I write, it's because I'm having the problem myself, and I work through it in a very public platform, and I trust that millions of other people have that problem too.
Naturally, yeah.
Yes. So I started asking myself, I'm like, what is my problem here? Like, what is this kind of crisis that I'm going through? And eventually I settled on a crisis of hope. It's like, I don't know what to hope for. And I think essentially it's kind of what a lot of people, what's commonly known as a midlife crisis. As you get the house, you get the car, you get the 2.5 kids, you get the white picket fence, and you wake up at 45 and you're like, oh shit, I did the checklist and I'm still here. Mm-hmm. What the hell do I do now?
Yeah.
And so that kind of became the starting point for the book. It's like, where do we look for hope? How do the things that we choose to hope for perhaps cause problems that we don't realize?
Yeah. And I want to get into the whole book writing process, but I think we got to go through a few things before we get all the way there. One of the things that I both love and hate about the new book is this idea of the uncomfortable truth.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably like a love-hate thing for most people who read it because it's uncomfortable.
Sure.
But true. And maybe just explain that for everyone so that we're operating on a shared context.
I wish I could read the actual clip. So it's...
Is it the Starbucks cup thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have it?
Yes.
Can you pull it up?
Yeah, I got it right here. One day, actually, you should read it.
Liam, let me read this shit. Come on. So this is in chapter 1. I say, if I worked at Starbucks, I wouldn't write people's names on the cup of coffee. This is what I would write. One day, you and everyone you love will die. And beyond a small group of people for an extremely brief period of time, little of what you say or do will ever matter. This is the uncomfortable truth of life, and everything you think or do is but an elaborate avoidance of it. We are inconsequential cosmic dust, bumping and milling about on a tiny blue speck. We imagine our own importance. We invent our purpose. We are nothing. Enjoy your fucking coffee.
I mean, that is some if that doesn't inspire you in the morning, I don't know what the hell will. You know what I'm saying?
We've all felt that on a Monday.
Yeah. What I love about it is it just calls it like it is, which is a theme in your work, I think.
Yeah.
You're actually just calling it out.
Sure.
It's not less or any less or more true because you wrote it down. It's just in front of someone, and now you have to sit there and read it. And I would imagine you get a lot of emotional responses to your writing because of things like this.
Yeah.
Was this one of the realizations you went through in this whole period, or was this just something you had hung on to for a while already?
Well, I think the uncomfortable truth is essentially anybody who's depressed or perhaps having like an anxiety attack. It's because they're facing the uncomfortable truth. Like it's essentially this sense that anything you do is meaningless. So why do anything? Mm-hmm. And the terror and apathy that creates in your life. And the argument, I actually finished Subtle Art with a chapter that talks about this, and then I opened up the new book with the same kind of concept. My argument is that pretty much everything we do in our lives is a struggle to create something meaningful, create something that we feel like adds value to ourselves, adds value to the world. And when we fail, when those things that we're building that add value fail for us, we fall back to the uncomfortable truth. We're like, oh shit, why do anything? And what's interesting is that there's something about 21st century life. There's a lot of scary data about depression and anxiety and suicide and drug overdoses, and all these things are on the rise, even though materially and technologically things are better than they've ever been before. Right. So there's something about the successes of modern life that make it difficult for people to know what to hope for, and they fall back into, the coffee cup. Right,
which is effectively where you were
yes.
At the time.
Sure.
And so you kind of found your way, as I understand it, or my interpretation of kind of listening to you do other interviews and your own writing is you found your way back by writing about it.
Yes.
I mean, on some level, the new book is kind of like a reflection on the process of going through that yourself.
Yes, it's I wrote myself out of a depression,
yeah.
essentially, and it's and in many ways, the concepts and ideas in the book are the things that I came across that kind of saved me personally.
Yeah. So I want to start diving in here a little bit because at your heart, you're a writer.
Yes.
And if someone reads your book titles, right, they're going to say, all right, this Mark Manson guy, he's the reason there's like 12 books on the bestseller list that say fuck and shit and everything else in the title. And he was the guy who invented this. Like, he doesn't care about anything. That's the whole title says. He doesn't care about anything. That's not actually true.
No, it's not.
However, it would be easy for someone passing by to come to this conclusion before they actually know anything about you, know anything about your writing, your process, the craft that you follow. Do you enjoy that aspect of it? Like, what's that like for the passing aspect to be so different from the reality of who you really are?
You know, it's funny. For years, I would meet readers, and one of the most common things I would hear from them is, wow, you're so much nicer than I thought you'd be. And I'm like, is that a compliment? Like, I don't, like, they're like, yeah, I thought you'd be an asshole, basically. I mean, as you heard from the entrance music, you know, if Tony Robbins is Justin Timberlake, I'm Slayer, you know? Like, I like a little bit of chaos.
Yeah.
I like the darkness.
Yeah.
And I like having rough edges, because I think that's ultimately what people relate to. Like, we all, like, life is always going to be messy.
Yeah.
Life's always going to be, you know, if you fail, you're going to have a crisis. If you succeed, you're going to have a crisis. You're just going to have a crisis. So we might as well talk about crises.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Pain is the through line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about pain.
Yeah.
And instead of trying, like, deluding ourselves over and over again, that there's a way to avoid it. So I understand. I'm very aware of my brand and kind of the shock value and the controversy that it puts out there. But there is there's a method to the madness, because it is that shock value that kind of jars people, makes them a little bit more open and willing to face a more pessimistic self-help, if you will.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into, I mean, I think of you as a craftsperson when it comes to writing. Like, you really take it seriously.
Yeah.
You care about writing. And today, people might think of you as the author of these 2 books that have done really well. And you have a third one, actually, that was further back about different topics. But you were writing a blog before either of these books were even relevant. And that was kind of the core of everything. So just kind of give the overview of, like, how does your non-book operation work?
Sure.
What was the core of what you did before these books came along? So
I started blogging in 2007. And initially, I started a number of blogs and websites, and most of them failed.
Like all of us.
Well, yeah, actually, all of them except for one failed. And the one that didn't fail was actually a dating advice website. And so I was like, all right, I guess I'm a dating expert now. So, because this is the only thing that people actually apparently want to read from me. And so I did that for about 3 or 4 years. And what was interesting is, you know, it became a pretty successful blog. I started making a full-time, not like a great living, but I was making a full-time income, you know, by 2009 or 2010. And then something really interesting happened around 2011, 2012. As I was doing more research and working with people one-on-one, I started to realize that, like, there's not really such thing as a dating problem. People might experience the problem as a dating problem, but it's like, if the same issues coming up over and over again and dates you go on, it's not the dates that are the problem, it's your own insecurity or your self-image or your beliefs about gender or sex or whatever. And so I started writing more about these personal development issues, these psychology issues, because that was at the root of all these relationship problems. And when I did that, things just blew up and they took off. And there were a couple rebrands in there which were very effective, but essentially by 2014, I built a blog with about 2.5 million readers a month. And I mean, these days it's less than that. Thanks, Facebook. But it's that was my bread and butter the whole time. And it was amazing because it actually, when I wanted to publish Subtle Art, I kind of had a card in my back pocket of, like, I could self-publish it. So like, I knew I could self-publish it and make a buttload
Right.
of
You had
money.
enough readers that would work.
Yeah, and so when I went into these meetings with publishers, it gave me a lot of leverage. You know, it's like, I'm only here for your distribution network. And as I later found out, you do need an editor. Like, professional editors are very, very good at what they do. But initially I kind of walked in, I'm like, I don't need your money. And that gave me a lot of power in the negotiations, which then helped the book be better. You know, the publisher put more effort into it, which then made the book better, which made the launch better, which then it blew up, and you know, now everybody and their dogs read it. But it's funny because it's been one of those situations, like I'm a overnight success that took 9 years to do.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's because everyone likes to think of it as overnight
Yes.
because it's easier that way on their egos. So I texted a few of our friends, mutual friends, and I asked, you know, if you were interviewing Mark Manson on stage and you were really trying to pull out what he's remarkable at on behalf of the audience, what would you highlight? And related to the writing process, one of our friends said, headlines and titles is something that I think Mark is better than 95% of people online. You know, dig into that some. So I'd love to start there because every article, every book has a title or a headline.
Yep.
And I think everyone struggles with what is the title I should put on this thing to make people pay attention. You don't, I mean, I'm sure that there are struggles with it, but you do a very good job of it. So
Sure.
when you're, at what point in your writing process do headlines come in and how does that relate to the subject?
It does. Sometimes the headlines come first, some other times the content comes first. It really depends on how the article takes shape. But I discovered very early on, like I think one of the reasons why my site blew up when it did and the way it did was I caught on to the game of the social media virality game before almost anybody else.
Right.
And it's funny, you know, I mentioned all those sites that I started and that they failed. What was very useful when I started those was I studied all the marketing, I studied the copywriting, I took copywriting courses and everything. And they all made me feel icky and weird. And, you know, I didn't think of myself as a copywriter. But when the social media stuff started coming along, I realized that you could use the same copywriting principles to, I mean, essentially today we all know it as clickbait, but back then, like people hadn't really thought about it.
Right.
And so my process essentially, the headline is incredibly important, and I will write out minimum 10 to 15 titles.
10 to 15 for everything that you publish.
Every article, unless I have like a real home run out the gate, you know? And I think as time has gone on, it's gotten a little bit easier and they're less crucial, but yeah, 10 to 15 titles. And then I pick the best one from there, and I consult with my team about it as well. But look, you can write the best article in the world, but if you don't have a title that catches people's attention and gets them to like want to dive into it, you're doing a disservice to your own content. So eventually, like you have to be aware of the dynamics of attention and copywriting and be able to, even if you're not selling anything, be able to apply those to your writing in such a way that you're going to get that engagement that you want.
Yeah, and you can either ignore it because you don't like the way that works, or you can acknowledge it and use it to your advantage and do some good for people in the way that you write your articles.
Yes.
Which I think is kind of the approach you take is, you know, you're not willing to do anything to get a click, but you are very focused on let's make sure they get to the thing that I've written, and then I'm going to do a really good job of giving them something valuable. So what's kind of so that's kind of the headline piece. What's like your process for starting from, I'm experiencing a thing, I'm going to write about that. What's kind of the end-to-end start to publish?
So the first step, I have a document that I can access from my phone, from my computer, from anywhere. And I just use it, I just jot down ideas. So, you know, let's say just in our conversation, something occurs to me. You know, I'll pull out my phone here on stage, fuck it, why not? Pull out my phone, jot it down on that Google sheet or whatever, and then I let it sit there. You know, there's not really any organization to it. And at this point, I've got like 3 or 4 pages of ideas. So when it's time to actually write an article, I pull that up, and I've got this long list of ideas. And for me, the most important thing, I kind of scan through it, And the most important thing for me is I look for what idea generates an emotional reaction in me, myself. Because one thing I learned a long time ago is that if you're not excited about what you're writing, then nobody else is going to be.
Yep.
So I shouldn't ever be writing something just because it's like, oh, well, it's good SEO. You know, like, you have to be excited about it first. And so I look through that document, find something that's exciting, stands out to me, grab it, and then I take it and I create an outline. And I'll actually go through a couple revisions of the outline, then I'll write the draft, and then the real magic is in the revision of the draft.
Okay.
And so I'll do about 2 revisions of it, then I'll give it to my editor, he'll do a revision of it, I'll do one last revision of it, then hand it off for, you know, grammar, punctuation, whatever. Images, you know, my guy will go find probably 24 images. I'll pick 4 or 5 to put on the article. And then finally we publish it.
Yeah.
So it's a good, start to finish, it's like a 4 to 5 day process.
Wow, okay.
Per article.
So you're kind of in this habit of having a sparring partner and an editor.
Yes.
Was that true before you were writing books?
No. Okay. And honestly, that was the biggest piece that I learned. So anybody here who knows an author knows that, like, we all love, our favorite thing is to shit on our publishers. It's like, they don't do anything, I market it all myself. And it feels that way a lot, especially if you're coming from an internet background.
Yeah.
Because you're so used to, like, pushing your stuff yourself that when you get to a publisher, you're like, man, that's kid stuff. The real value in a publisher is your editor. And a lot of authors, whether it's an ego thing or an insecurity thing, they really resist that. You know, a lot of them will, like, resist taking their editor's feedback. And it's just, if you find somebody you trust, you let them look at it, let them tear it apart, and then trust that they're right. And it's made my writing better, and it's made my sites right. It was such an effective thing writing subtle art that I actually went out and found a guy to do it on my web content.
Okay. And does he work with you full time now?
Yes.
So you've got a team.
Yeah.
Which is part of, you know, going back to even the conversation with Caleb and Pat yesterday, a little bit of it is success allows you to surround yourself with other talented people.
Yeah.
Access to money maybe is the right way to put that. Success has a lot of baggage with it, but access to financial resources means you can go hire an editor and he can be really great at what he does. Yeah. And it's just an article, not to poo-poo an article, but, like, it's an article, and most people don't have those resources. But for you, you do. So you've got this team that helps with the publishing process now. So how do you interact with your team? We talked a little bit about this last night, but they're a key part of how you operate now. So what's that look like?
Well, at this point, my team basically runs my entire site. My goal was to get it to the point, you know, there's one thing that I'm an expert at, and that's just writing stuff. So there's no reason for me to be dealing with anything else if I don't have to. So my goal, I decided in 2016, my goal was to get it to the point where my team could run the entire site without me. That I give them an article and I'm like, take it away.
Yep.
It took a long time to get there. I hired a number of people throughout 2012 to about 2015. I hired probably half a dozen people. Most of them didn't really work out. I ended up with 2 full-time guys that were really, really talented and hungry young guys. Yep. And I feel like that's the sweet spot. You know, it's very tempting, you know, to hire some hotshot Google programmer who's having a midlife crisis or something. Like, it's tempting, but the best thing you can do is just find a really smart 24-year-old who has nothing.
They're hungry.
And then offer them something.
It's like the hiring version of being excited about the article you're about to write. You know, they're going to show up excited to do that work.
Yes. Yeah. And one thing that I did in my hiring process is I actually implemented into my hiring process that they would have to learn something. So I would give them something that they were not expecting. I would say, like, learn how to, like, when I hired the guy who became my tech guy, he didn't know how to program.
Yeah.
So I said, figure out how to modify this JavaScript to make this work differently. And then I waited and saw how long it took him to do it, and he did it in like a day. But it's like if he can teach himself to do that as part of the application process, then he's gonna. I mean, now he like codes in like 4 languages and does all sorts of. I don't even know what the hell he does anymore. But I want lifers working for me, and then once they got to that around 2016, they had gotten to a point where, I trusted them and I wanted them to feel ownership. So I told them, I said, look, this is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna cut you in on a piece of the profit. And now you guys are now responsible for growing this thing. I'm gonna go write books and sit on stages and look pretty.
Yep.
And
how's that last part going?
I think pretty well.
Yeah, great.
You have to ask them, but you guys are in charge of the day-to-day, the site, social media, optimization, SEO, like all that stuff.
Yep.
And they grew, within 18 months, website revenue grew 300%. And this was part of my identity crisis too, because I'm like, my own team doesn't even need me. It's like I don't even have a team that needs me. I could just play Zelda. So it's been one of the most wonderful things. So
Well, it makes you truly a writer. I mean, that's your entire job.
Exactly.
Which is what you designed. But it's a beautiful thing, hiring people. To go back, to Rachel's reference, I couldn't agree with her more. If you have the resources or you're even close to being able to hire someone to do what you're not good at,
yes.
I mean, it can remarkably change your business. But to come back to this, I think it would be easy to assume that you're entirely living off the books. That's not entirely true, though. The website was doing its thing without the books. So what's kind of the business model there? How does that work?
So that's a really good question. So back in the day, I did the classic courses. I had a funnel. So, maybe an ebook would lead into a course. And then if they love that, like a high-end course or consultations or whatever. Something interesting happened around 2014, 2015 is that the audience got so broad that no matter what course I put out, 99.9% of my audience didn't give a shit about it. And what I started, and that got very frustrating because I'm like, man, I've got this massive list. I'm like putting all this effort into these courses, and just way fewer people are signing up or interested in it than I feel like should be.
Right.
And something funny started happening too, is I started noticing that the people who were taking the courses, they didn't actually have the problem that the course solved. Like people were signing up for my anxiety course, and they're like, "Yeah, I don't have anxiety issues."
They come in hot, just like, "Here's how I solved my anxiety 5 years ago."
No, like they were showing up, and they're like, "I just wanted to read more stuff you wrote," and I was like, "Wow, okay. Clearly, I've got the wrong business model going on here." So that fundamental question of like, what is the problem you're solving for your prospect? I had always assumed like, oh, well, I've got people with anxiety issues and I got people with relationship issues, and so now I got to like create a course for every single person. That wasn't necessarily true. It turned out that the biggest, at least for my audience, the biggest pain point was they just wanted more shit to read. So I was like, okay, forget this whole course thing, forget the funnels, let's simplify everything, and I basically just created a site membership. So 75% of the site is free, 25%, including all the video and audio content, is paid for, $6 a month. So I cast a very wide net, make it very easy to sign up, and kind of it's almost like a little fan club. And it was funny because this was back in 2015 where like nobody did this business model, and I've got a big thing against advertising, so I was like, I'm not running ads. So everybody kind of thought I was crazy, and sure enough, as soon as we launched it, like revenue like dropped like 40%.
It's encouraging.
What's that?
It's encouraging.
Yeah, right.
On the right path at that point.
So then I ran around with my hair on fire for a while, and I kept telling my team, I'm like, give it time. And we tweaked a bunch of stuff and eventually found kind of the right ratio of paid content to free content, and the right way to market it to the email list and everything. And now it's it's thriving. It's incredible. It's like, as a creator, it's kind of the dream business model.
Yeah.
Where people who love your shit just want to pay you for more of your shit.
Yeah, keep doing it.
Exactly.
Right.
Just
Yeah,
like,
it's
show
ideal.
me more stuff. Like, okay.
Yeah, because I think, I bet a ton of people in the room can relate. It's like, well, I make really good stuff over here, but I feel like I've got to find a way to package it differently so that people will pay for it.
Yeah.
And you just figured out, well, they'll just pay for it if I just give them more of the same thing, because that's what they wanted to begin with. So, all right, so let's go to today then. What's kind of your monthly readership? How many people are on your list? And then how many members do you have?
Okay. Today, I think monthly readers probably, it varies, but like 1.2 to 1.3.
Okay.
Which is about half of what it used to be.
Million.
I know, poor me. Email list is about 500,000 to 600,000, and then paid subscribers is about 16,500.
Okay. Yeah, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, so I mean, we're running, well into, well, not well into seven figures, but definitely into seven figures.
And that has nothing to do with the books.
Yeah, nothing.
Yeah, well, I mean, they obviously
And the
feed
whole
each
thing's
other.
run by two dudes who
Yeah.
I like barely even have to talk to.
Which is fantastic. I think this is some
I
of the
hate
stuff
talking
that,
to people.
I think this is some of the stuff that people don't really know about what actually fuels your business. You could live off of that without the books ever happening.
Absolutely.
And so the books end up, obviously it's wonderful, but it's just kind of gravy on top of what you've got going already.
Absolutely, it's a lot of gravy.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of gravy. But the other beautiful thing too is that the two careers synergize.
Yeah.
So when I go into a publisher meeting, it's like, hey, I've got 16,000 people that will buy whatever I put out like tomorrow.
Right.
And that is hugely powerful to a publisher. And then on the flip side, it's like when my books come out and they do well and you see them in the airport and everything, and people like them, they go on Google and they look me up and they find my website and they like start reading articles and they join the membership and they follow me on social media and it's so that there's like an ecosystem that they both feed each other, synergize into each other.
Right. And to be sure, if you didn't have, that's one of the key things publishers want. What's your platform? What's your audience? So it helps getting good deals as well.
Absolutely. I hate to say it, but that's probably the biggest thing publishers look for right now.
Yeah.
Is they want, which is why authors are like, what do you do again? What the hell do you do? Like, you want me to bring the book and the audience, so it's like, why am I paying you? But it's anybody here who wants to do a conventional book deal at some point, platform is huge.
Yeah. So let's get into the book creation process for a minute. So for articles, you've got your headline, an outline. You refine the outline, which I find really interesting. For me, when I have a great outline, the writing is like paint by numbers.
Yes.
Because the outline actually just tells me, okay, I have sections I have to fill in with my thoughts. And then you go through a round of edits yourself, and then you have an editor go through it, you revise, and then you're ready for publish. How does that compare to the book creation process? And maybe let's talk in terms of Everything is Fucked, since it's the more recent one.
Yeah.
How did you go from, okay, I've got this little thread to pull on of lacking hope right now in my own life, and that's a starting point. What did it look like to go do the research? You have a bunch of philosophy quoted in there, and you pull pretty broadly from all over, going way back in history all the way to current psychology research. So what did it look like from research to writing, outlining, all that stuff?
Yeah. So the process in very abstract terms is the same, even including the title. So I think for this book, I came up with probably 40 or 50 different titles.
Okay.
And went around and around with my agent, my editor, with them, just blasting them with another 12 title ideas. So you start with the outline. The thing that's different about the book is that the book kind of evolves as you write it. So you start with you get a good outline in place that you're excited about and you feel like it's going to be a good book, and then you start writing, chapter 1, chapter 2, and then you get about halfway into chapter 2 and you realize that all that stuff you outlined doesn't actually make sense. And so there's this awkward spot, and it's funny because I've noticed that it always comes around chapter 3 and 4. Like every book I've written, chapter 3 and 4 is just like me curled up in a fetal position under the table, like rocking back and forth. But I think it's because that's when it's around there that you actually find out like what the book is. It's easy to write a chapter 1 because you're excited about the idea. Mm-hmm. It's easy to write a chapter 2 because you just gotta kind of like lead into the outline. But by the time you get to chapter 3 or 4, you start to find out if your idea has weight, if it can carry an entire 200-page book, 300-page book. And most of the time it can't. And that's a hard thing to accept, especially because once you accept that, you need to go back and redo the outline. Yeah. And in extreme cases, you need to throw out the book idea entirely. Yeah. So every book I've done, I've started and thrown out 2 or 3 other books. Really? Yeah. So I'd like write 50 pages, hit chapter 3 or 4, have an outline crisis, and then decide that like this isn't the book. This isn't. It's either bad or it's not. We've all read those nonfiction books that it's like 20 pages are really good. Yeah, should have been an article. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so most book ideas are that. Yeah. And it's once you get past those first 20 pages that you start feeling that. And so that means you got to chunk it and start over. So did that happen with the latest one? Yep. What was the first one that you threw out? The first one, well, so again, coming back to the weird pressures and everything, Harper came to me and they were basically like, they wanted to do the chicken soup of the soul thing. And I was like, absolutely not. And they're like, okay, well, is there anything else that you can put out very quickly? Because when you have a huge hit like this, most of the time it doesn't last. Yeah. Like the weirdest thing about Subtle Art is that it's lasted this long. Yeah. How many weeks in a row now on the bestseller list? 150. I mean, it's crazy. 40. Yeah. It hasn't left basically. Yeah. And so they came back and they're like, is there anything that you could do quickly? And I had ideas for like a relationships book in the past, and relationships has always kind of been my bread and butter. Like it's the topic that is easiest for me to write about. So I was like, yeah, I could do a relationship book. They're like, great, can you put fuck in the title? I'm like, whatever, yeah, sure. And so that was the first one, and I got about 20, 30 pages into that, and I was like, I don't want to write a relationships book. Like, what the hell am I doing? Yeah. Why did I say yes to this? So I tossed that. Then there was another book that I started writing that I think I actually used bits and pieces of it in this new one, but I got way too philosophical with it. It was a book about meaning, like what actually gives us a sense of meaning in our lives. And it got very nerdy and navel-gazy. And so around page 50, I was like, I don't think anybody's going to read this one. Yeah. So I tossed that, held on to the good 10 or 20 pages, tossed it, and then I started again with this idea around hope. Yeah. And kind of like what's happening to us individually and then what's also happening to us as a culture. Yeah. I think it was James Altucher who said to you that your notes are as fascinating as the book throughout the book. And to me, one thing that's interesting about people who use citations liberally, you, James Clear, there are other writers like that, Adam Grant, Dan Pink, is that there's so much that happens to fuel the actual writing. So what's the relationship between reading, consumption, and actually creation and writing in your process? Are they happening at the same time? Or, Tim Ferriss has this photo of him for the 4-Hour Chef. He's got like a table full of books that he just read all of them, and then he wrote. Yeah. Are you like that, or are you more of a back and forth kind of person? It starts out with a lot of research. It's like with the outline. Like you go into it thinking you know what the book's going to be, and then you get a third of the way in, and you're like, no, that's not the book. So what usually happens to me is I do a bunch of research for that outline that I think it's going to be. But then once the outline changes, I'm in this like frantic catch-up. I'm like, oh shit, like the second half of the book's gonna be completely different than I thought. I need to do a bunch of research I didn't do. And so I like have that, I'm like frantically trying to catch up with my own writing, like stay ahead of my own writing. So I have this, I end up doing probably half the research as I'm writing, and it's a very stressful, painful process. I'm sure. So I think, one of the things that really resonates with me is, and Eric has a pin about this actually, of being the curled up in the fetal position person on the ground. I think we can probably all relate to that.
who are the people you turn to or the habits you turn to when you find yourself in that fetal position to bring you out of it and bring you back so that you're ready to get going again?
Well, my wife's here. She's kind of like stop number one.
Yeah.
She keeps me sane. That's true for book launches too. All the anxiety around, there's tons of anxiety around, I mean, any product launch, but a book launch in particular because there's so much media involved.
Yeah.
You know, family. I've got some really good friends in New York. One of them happens to be a shrink, which is helpful.
Quite.
I'm like, hey man, let me buy you a beer. You know, it's like we get there and I'm like, dude, I need help. He's like, all right, what's going on? Yeah, I mean, it's just people I trust in my life is best.
Have you gotten good at being able to recognize it in yourself and say to them, you know, Fernanda or Peter, whoever it might be in New York, like, it's one of those times, you know, or do they need to come to you?
I think I'm getting better at recognizing it. I know years ago I was pretty bad. I think I even wrote about it in Subtle Art that I was bad about it. I think I'm getting better, but I have a tendency to just bury it and soldier on. And so I guess the other thing that's really important, really helpful, that I have to learn the hard way over and over again is to schedule time off, to schedule vacation, schedule time.
During the process.
Yes, in the middle of the process, in the middle of the launch, you know, like schedule a day off, because I'll just barrel through weeks and weeks and weeks without taking a break and be a total stress ball.
Which is not helpful for writing a book that you want a bunch of people to read. Yeah.
No, or promoting it, or, you know, and the thing about being a stress ball is that it starts warping reality.
Yeah.
So you start, things that should make you happy, like really upset you, and things that should upset you, like you don't care about, you know, so you've got to like unwind all that stress to like have a good relationship with the world again.
Yeah, totally. So we've got a few minutes left. I want to do like a little rapid fire stuff because I think you've got a couple other fascinating things that you're very good at that I think it would be helpful for other people to learn from. So one of them is that you are not afraid to tackle tough topics. I mean, you lean right into the toughest topics sometimes. A great example is you've got an article entitled "The Problem with Feminism," which is a part of a series that started with the problem with masculinity, which you added a good note to the front of the feminism ones, make sure people knew that it wasn't just a one-off thing.
The great thing about that, so I wrote the first article, because people are always asking me to write about gender. And I was like, all right. So I wrote the masculinity article. And all these people were like, yeah, go Mark, this is great. And I was like, yeah, great. You know, I'm gonna do the next one about feminism. Like, yeah, it's gonna be great. We can't wait to see it. And then I wrote the feminism one. They're like, what the fuck?
I thought you were on our team.
I thought you were on our team.
Exactly
I'm like, no, I'm on nobody's team. Everything's pain.
Right. I'm just trying to get you to realize this one thing. You had this quote in the recent book that said, I just loved it. I had to pull it out. It said, political extremists, because they are intractable and impossible to bargain with, are by definition childish. They're a bunch of fucking babies. And it was just another one of these examples where you're not trying to win the favor of any one group of people. You're really just trying to call it out like you see it, but that leads to consequences for you. Or I presume it does. So I guess the question form of that would be, does it lead to consequences? And what kind of conversations do you find yourself in because you wade right into these topics?
I think I've gotten very, very good at weathering hate mail and trolls.
Well, yeah, let's dive into that. How? Because I bet a lot of people here are terrified of that very thing.
It is. And if you're not used to it, it's very upsetting. You know, I remember when I started blogging, just having one negative comment on a post would like ruin my afternoon. And I'd sit there and I'm like, this person is wrong, and I'm going to spend the next 3 hours explaining why they're wrong. And you know, and then it's pointless. I think it's one thing. So one is just desensitization to it. The other thing is that once you get bigger and once your audience gets bigger, you have to understand that like you're going to start hitting people that aren't predisposed to your message. So you're always going to have your tribe, like the people who are just going to love you and they have similar values and similar worldviews. But as you spread out further and further and further, you're going to run into people who are just like completely misaligned with you, and that's fine. And they're going to have those negative reactions, and that's fine. That like those negative reactions are essentially just the border of your current message. And so rather than trying to argue with them or fight them or get upset and be like, oh, why don't they like me? You know, I just try to understand like where is that line that I'm bumping up against? Like what is it about their worldview or their approach to my content that is a mismatch? And is that something worth thinking about in writing future articles?
Right. So one thing that comes along with that is knowing who you do want feedback from, because calibrating is really hard when it would be really easy to put up this exterior where you say, I don't need to hear it.
Yeah.
But I think my understanding is you do a pretty good job of seeking out the feedback that actually you want to calibrate against, so you make sure what you're putting out is what you intend to put out.
Yeah, I make a point, like I still read my own email. My assistant kind of screens through it and gets rid of, my policy with criticism is that it needs to be thoughtful and respectful.
Yeah.
So I do come across a lot of thoughtful and respectful criticism, but part of it is I've built a system to filter for that. You know, like these days, if you go on Facebook or Twitter, like it's a shit show, and none of it is constructive or useful. But I found email tends to be the most thoughtful criticism that I get. So that I still engage with that.
Okay. And then you have a book club and a writers group that you're a part of. Is that true?
Yeah, a few different. I've got a book club in New York that I started with some friends, and that's been fantastic.
Yeah. And do you use that as a chance to calibrate and to kind of throw ideas out and critique one another, or is it more just like hanging out with friends?
A little bit of both. I ran a lot of ideas in this new book by those guys. When I was writing it, and they all read an early draft. And gave feedback and criticism on it. So it is helpful. I mean, just as an author, I guess this is another thing that's different with books. You want to get you want to get a diversity of criticism.
Right.
So you want to find multiple friends and family members who represent the different demographics you're trying to appeal to.
Yeah, totally. We're technically out of time. I've got two final questions just so the team in the back doesn't freak out. I know that we're out of time. Two final things here. You had this concept, this one thing I wanted to get to that we're just not going to right now, which is fine, is how you keep your feet on the ground in the face of this crazy success that you've had, conventional success, like the idea of success that you've had. And you had this concept in the book called the formula of humanity, which is a reflection of other learning. Like it's someone else's concept that you've reflected back to us, basically. But the quote was, act that you use humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. I wondered if you just wanted to maybe comment on that as kind of like an idea.
I love how it's like we're out of time, and then you bring up Kant's moral philosophy as
well,
the final question.
But I want to give a jumping off point. It's a good reason to read the book, and so I want to let's give a jumping off point for people to have a reason to go really explore that. You couldn't have had a 45-minute conversation on it either.
Oh, just on that.
Yeah.
So long story short, a big part of the book is, the philosopher Immanuel Kant, one of his arguments is that ultimately we need to find meaning and purpose and kind of the moral good outside of our own desires and sentiments. And that eventually kind of became the conclusion I came to. So if you're really into 18th century German philosophy, this book's for you.
So I think the thing I want to highlight about Mark is if you have a pedestrian level view of this guy and his work, I think it would be really easy to want to ignore him. Especially, it's like people who picked up Game of Thrones in season 6 or 7. He's already so popular. Like I've missed the train. I don't get that guy. He's like cusses in his titles and stuff. The more I researched about him, and the more I've gotten to spend time with you in person, the more depth of character and the more truth in the way he acts, I see compared to what he says, and they're pretty aligned. And I think that's pretty hard to find and pretty special. So I just want to highlight that and,
Thanks, man.
Commend you for it. Not that
Appreciate
you need my praise. But I wanted to wrap up with, I think, a thing that you kind of close the book this way, and I think it's a good way to close this talk because it's very deep, it's very meaningful, and I think it's very reflective of how the maturity of your writing, the intellectual side of your writing that I think shows in this book. So you close the book basically with, so instead of looking for hope, try this. Don't hope. Don't despair either. Don't hope for better. Just be better. Be something better. Be more compassionate, more resilient, more humble, more disciplined. And I think you're doing a pretty good job of living that. So thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
Yeah.